This is Jeff Greaux here, and the only way I can explain this is with a video. I don't know if it's because I'm being too lazy to actually do some CAD stuff or some, you know, Blender and some other stuff. I don't feel like doing all that kind of computer animation to demonstrate what I'm trying to express. So I'm just going to use a pen and paper, if you don't mind. Here's my superposition chart, and as you can see, there are 9 dimensions. I didn't really take the time to explain this. I kind of just posted everything. But, I'm trying to communicate with smart people, so you should have already figured out most of this chart. This chart, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, I'd say this chart speaks volumes, like the Encyclopedia Britannica or something along that order. So I'm going to show you some things that you may not be seeing in the chart. They are much, much more than what you're seeing at first appearances. So I'm going to shift a little bit down below the chart to a blank piece of paper, and I'm going to show you something. Now, as you can see, I'm going to kind of go over this chart a little bit before I go into this. Here we have the first dimension, and then the second dimension in three-dimensional space. Now, everyone knows we live in three-dimensional space. I'm not a physicist, I'm pretty much self-educated, and I've come up with this theory on my own. I got into physics because I got in trouble protesting Texas's adjudicated probation program. In an act of civil disobedience, I refused to do the probation, and I left the country. Well, the feds came after me, and while they were looking for me, I decided, well, I have nowhere to go. Every country is rubber stamping extradition back to the United States, so the only place I could go would be to another planet. As crazy as it sounds, I started studying physics, and that's how I got into physics. I have a background in computer technology and information technology, and I'm a business analyst. I worked for several banks and worked for major corporations. But I got into physics because I was interested in finding a way to leave the planet, and I believe I did. But before I get into that, I'm going to explain this. I'm not a fugitive anymore. I went on and turned myself in, and all that's behind me now. I didn't spend much time in jail, not as much as I thought I would. Spent a few months in prison and now got released. And now I decided to take what I've learned and share it with the world to make the world a better place. I'm in North Carolina now, and hopefully I'm done with Texas. Yeah, I will never be going back there ever again. Getting back to my video, I'm going to kind of go over this a little bit. Here we have the first dimension, which is latitude, or the latitude thread. Three-dimensional space is basically made up of two positions. You have the first position and the second position, just like they say in supercomputing about superposition. I read an article, I think it was in Wired magazine, where it talked about superposition being one position being off and the other position being on, and the superposition being both positions. Well, I said, how would God make superposition? If superposition exists, it should exist in nature. So I said, well, let me take a look at three-dimensional space. I said, what would be the first position? Well, the first position would be latitude, right? We know on three-dimensional space, we have, on two-dimensional space, we have a latitude line, and then we have what I call a longitude line. That would be two-dimensional space. The third dimension would be if I stuck my finger through this paper and it came up out of the paper. That would be three-dimensional space. But we see in superposition, there's only two positions. The first position and second position, and both of them combined make the superposition. That's incorrect. God's superposition creates a third position, what I would like to call a neutral position, which would be the z-plane. Here we have an x-plane, sorry, and then we have a y plane, and then we have a z plane, which would be the neutral position. So all three of these combined make up the entire superposition, or God's superposition. So that's where I got the idea about superposition. So I started out with the latitude thread for the space-time fabric, and then the longitude thread, and then the superposition being the latitude thread, longitude, and then the z-plane, which would be a neutral position. All three of them combined make a superposition. So I have three-dimensional space being the superposition of the first and second dimension, right? Well, in God's superposition, you're only allowed three positions. The first position, the opposing position, and then the superposition, which is both of them combined with the neutral position. But we hear everybody talking about time as the fourth dimension. Well, in God's superposition, there's only three positions. That's it. So in order to have a fourth position, you would simply have to do it at the same exact time. So we have to put the fourth dimension not below the third, but right beside the first one. And this is why, because in order for me to figure out the order of the fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensions, I had to think, how do you add time to a line of latitude? Well, you have to think. In order to add time to a line of latitude, you have to connect both ends. What is time? Intervals, right? 1, 2, 3. That's all time is, just intervals. 1, 2, 3. There's just timing. The amount of time it takes to return back to where you started from. That's all time is. In order to make time, you would just have to simply connect both ends. So that's where I got temporal latitude from. I just connected both ends and I got a loop. Well, I did the same thing for temporal longitude. I connected both ends and I got a loop. Well, just like we did with both of these, we did God's superposition. You take latitude, and then longitude, you put them together, you get a sphere. You take two loops, two rings. Now, I can't really do the camera and see at the same time, but if you put both of those together, you're gonna get pretty much you're gonna get that. You're gonna get a sphere. And that would be the superposition. Now, I can't do, because you're adding time and doing it at the same time, you can't have latitude and temporal latitude at the same time. You can't do that because they're both the same thing. And you can't have longitude and temporal longitude at the same time. You can't do that because you can't have the same thing. But you can have longitude and temporal latitude at the same time, right? And you can have latitude and temporal longitude at the same time, but you can't have three-dimensional space and a temporal sphere at the same time. So the only order you can put this in would be to have the temporal sphere at the same time as the latitude thread, and the temporal latitude at the same time as the longitude thread, and then the temporal longitude at the same time as three-dimensional space. So now we've cheated, and I've expanded God's superposition to include 6 positions now instead of 3. Well, guess what? Now we have 2 columns. We have a space column and a time column, which means what? We can cheat again. Now we can create a third column because we have 2 columns, the first position and then the second position. Now we can create a superposition column. So we have space column, the time column, and now we have this space-time column, which is the superposition of the space column and time column. Now, in order for superposition in this column, we would have to take one item from this column and a second item from this column, from the time column. And then we would put one in each position. So what happens when you take latitude thread, and then you can't take temporal latitude, they're both the same thing, so you'd have to take the temporal longitude. So if you take latitude thread and longitude thread, you put them together, you would get a space-time vortex. Now, how do you see that? Because you have a line of latitude, right? And then you have temporal longitude, right? And all longitude is intervals. excuse me. And the latitude thread is a line. So if you have a line that's descending, right? Say it's going down in a direction. Let's say you have a line that's descending in a direction, right? Well, if the line is moving in this direction, the intervals would also have to move. So you would have, as the line descends, each interval would also descend. So you would have the second interval would be shorter than the first one. So you'd have 1 second, then half a second, then you would keep descending down till you got to a point. So here you would have your x plane, which is the temporal latitude, and then the y-plane, which is the latitude is the x-plane, then the temporal longitude is the y-plane, and as the line descends, the intervals will also descend, and it would go into a black hole or a space-time vortex to a singularity or a single point. And that would be the superposition of the first and the sixth dimension. Now, I did the same thing for the second dimension, longitude thread, and the temporal latitude. Now, when you put both of those together, you get the same effects, but it's going in opposite. It's going out, and you would start out singularity, and as you went out, the intervals would also increase, and they would go up. Now, we're going to go into this a little bit later, but I wanted to show you something that's really interesting.